Thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. Thank you for joining us. And with that, I call this July 8th, 2024 City Council work session to order. And then we did just get a reminder, microphones, you have to turn them on in order to be heard. And so remember the little button. And with that, I will turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Super excited tonight to continue our conversation about fire governance and what's next for the Eugene Springfield Fire Department. Happy to welcome Chief Caven and Dan Peterson from AP Triton. I think Chief Caven's going to do more of an intro to the topic. So for now, I'm just going to kick it over to the Chief.
Thank you, Manager, Mayor, Council. It's good to see you all in this beautiful new space and this vision come forward. The City Manager granted me a little bit of grace tonight as we intro into this important topic, just to give you a brief update on how our crews have done over the last week as we saw our area enter fire season on July 1st, which is slightly early for our area. Today, as we sit here, we're in the middle of our first red flag warning of the fire season, which is critical fire weather, usually a combination of heat, temperature, and wind. Most importantly for why the red flag today is we dipped below 20% humidity to 19% right about 5 o'clock. And so that's to be the first of many. We are upstaffed for it, upstaffed for both the heat and the red flag warning to make sure that we're adequately prepared to serve the community. And it's with kind of great pride that I bring up the service to the community that our crews have been performing over the last several days. This last week we ran 994 calls, which is a little bit higher than average. 2,100 unit responses in that time period and 141 fires. Those fires is about 40% uptick over the previous week. And then kind of most interestingly is a number of water rescues as our community seeks refuge in our rivers. We will continue to see more debris in the rivers as the landscape upriver, both on the McKenzie and the Willamette, recover from the fire. More trees fall in the wintertime. They end up in the rivers and strainers. A number of these rescues have been relatively dramatic. People trapped in strainers, rescue swimmers getting off the boat or off the bank and into the water into these very dangerous situations to support that. And so there's a great deal of pride. We've had a number of significant fires that have threatened our communities. One off North Game Farm Road, which was about between 20 and 28 acres in total perimeter. It burned quickly and burned technically before fire season even really started. And then a number of other fires. We had a fire threatening Bring this weekend early in the morning. We had a great response to that to protect that business. And then other than that, just a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous call volume, a lot of forced overtime due to staffing, and crews are showing up and they're doing an excellent job, and kind of segues into this topic that we're having. Just a couple other quick updates about interesting things. Our wildfire program is progressing with partnerships with the Western Fire Chiefs, and there's some community outreach that you'll be seeing here shortly. And then the outcome through many of your work in setting a legislative priority ahead of the short session due to the closure of University District Hospital. ESF partnered with Peace Health and submitted a proposal for the Innovation Fund, which secured us an advanced provider unit 7 days a week at peak hours that will have a nurse practitioner or PA and a paramedic from ESF in the field with a number of opportunities. And we'll schedule time as that evolves before we launch it to brief you on that. But lots of good work going out there, both operationally and administratively. So with that, this is our final opportunity with Dan from AP Triton on this governance report. As you might recall, this initiative kicked off with a kind of council update on ESF and our governance in late 2021, the establishment of a governance review panel in 2022, a series of meetings and challenges getting the right information and compiled in the right way that made sense to bring before the elected officials that led to the hiring of AP Triton here in 2023 to do a lot of work. I won't get into all of Dan's work. He will brief you on that in this update. But we're really excited, appreciate the support of the community and the council and city staff in bringing this important topic to the forefront and seeing it to resolution. Without further ado, I'll pass it to Dan Peterson.
Great, thank you. It's good to be present in person. Doing these, like the last update over Zoom, is always really hard, right? And last time we were here, we talked about the current conditions. And today we're going to go through the executive summary, which you should have a copy in your packet. And we'll start a little slideshow to kind of walk through this particular mode. We're ready? Oh, okay. Okay, perfect. So we presented to Springfield Council last week, and we're presenting here tonight. So again, the executive summary of our options. The purpose of this study, like I think we all know, was to evaluate these options, right? It was to continuing to operate as you are currently organized, one city providing service to the other, establishing an intergovernmental entity, forming a district, or dissolving the existing agreement. Ultimately, our target was really focused on trying to give you the material you needed to make the best decision that you can, looking at things related to what would be the components of whatever the agreement might look like, what are the financial implications, and what really is the impact to each city? What is the best that you would end up deciding? Any evaluation of the operational performance was out of the scope of this study, so we really focused on the administration portions and the actual options that we looked at. Some of the background, in 2007 is when you started your battalion agreement, the 3rd Battalion, and then you started this functional consolidation agreement beginning in 2010 to present. And I think we've covered these bullets in there pretty well in the earlier report and in what you've had. Your functional consolidation, you've improved your capacity greatly, right? You're able to manage quite a bit more consistent and dependable, reliable response by having as many people as you have available between the two cities. Collectively, you eliminated 11.25 positions, administrative positions, annual cost reduction of about $2.5 million in FY23 wages and benefits. $1.2 million of that was for Eugene, and $1.3 million of that was for Springfield. And that's all in the current conditions we talked about last time. With that fact, we worked on identifying desired outcomes. This list of things came from considerable time we spent with the stakeholders. Well over 50 interviews when we were first here in person, and then follow-up conversations with ESF staff, city staff from both sides. But fundamentally, we wanted to find a tool that we could evaluate each of these options related to what we identified as outcomes. And these outcomes that we found was that single governance and administration is achieved, operational advantages are retained, oversight by both cities is ensured, financial impacts are manageable, ESF staff's experience is positive, impact on city administration is reduced, sustainability is achievable, long-term planning for ESF is achievable, and reasonable time to implement. Now, none of the options will meet every single one. We just wanted to find a way to look at these from a perspective that will help you decide what feels right for you to move forward with. The first option that we looked at, of course, is continuing as currently organized. The really key challenges with the model that we have today is there's 2 separate city councils and city managers. There's 2 separate budgets, and staff are employed by either Springfield or Eugene, not by ESF. That structure creates a lot of the complexity and inefficiencies that are present today, that staff has worked extremely well together. In city staff, both cities, the fire department have really worked well at identifying a way to manage them and reduce them, but fundamentally, they can't seem to do much better than they are today. There's persistent issues that just continue to create those administrative challenges almost daily. Continuing as currently organized, what we found with this is does not provide single governance. It retains operational advantages that you have today. The cities do retain some oversight. We believe there's 5 additional positions to be effective in this, in any of the positions that keep ESF together, any of the models. Pretty much the same. The top priority is a deputy chief and a public information officer. Number 2 is a program specialist and program coordinator. And number 3 is a data analyst. And those are about $900,000 in today's wages to accomplish that, wages and benefits. The duplication of work we found was not sustainable for either ESF or the cities. The cities were having just as much challenge in their support services as ESF is. Each city can plan somewhat long-term, but ESF can't plan really long-term at all in the current model. Enhancing a little bit of involvement with the CMs or adjusting a few things could help with that, but not significantly. The model is currently in place. It would really take little time to implement other than what minor changes that you might want to make happen. The key issues that we found, we do not find staying in this model as a feasible option. We believe that staff have worked very hard for 13, 14 years to make it work, and it just fundamentally has some challenges that don't allow it to work effectively administratively. The next model we looked at was one city serving another. Revision of the intergovernmental agreement to allow for that, maybe a new one. Day-to-day operation and employment of staff administered by one city or the other. The city managers can collaborate, but all oversight and support would be provided by a single city. This is the simplest method to address a lot of the challenges. It eliminates the duplication, offers some streamlining of decision-making for fire and EMS services. When we look at how this works related to the desired outcomes, we found that it does provide single governance. It does retain an operational advantage that you have today. We found and we believe that the city providing that service, that administrative support, would have more decision-making authority than the other city, whichever way it went. It could be minimized with additional collaboration and conversation back and forth. The same 5 additional positions we feel are critical administratively. That's a deputy chief, PIO, program specialist, coordinator, and data analyst. There'd be an increased cost and challenge for the city that was selected to do the service, but clearly some of the money from one city would be helping to offset that and build that out. Right-sizing the support services for the city not selected. Both cities have indicated a challenge in being able to reduce just by having the fire department move. There's some infrastructure pieces that would not be able to be reduced. In Springfield, if Springfield were to take on the responsibility, there'd be about a $3.2 million savings from PERS and healthcare costs because of the different rates between Eugene and Springfield in those 2 areas. But there would be a potential impact on the PERS liability to Springfield and all of their employees, not just necessarily the fire department component. If Eugene were to take this on, there'd be an increase of about $1.2 million in PERS and healthcare costs by having the Springfield firefighters come into Eugene. Both cities have indicated a concern about the sustainability of their health plan, not known, but a concern whether or not it can continue without the fire department employees that are part of the plan. It does streamline the administrative services. The city providing service has to be able to manage the larger workload for it to be sustainable. It does improve long-term planning. Although anytime you have an agreement that can be terminated, your long-term planning is difficult. It's not as easy as a regular system. And then it would be the time to implement would require the work to decide the capacity of the city that was chosen and the cost of the transition, how that would be to add those employees from one city to the other. Our key issues here that we found is the ones that were concerning were one city would have more influence. That was a concern expressed by a number of elected officials. The ability for one city to manage the workload of the new staff. The increased cost if it was Eugene providing the service because of the impact of PERS and healthcare, and the potential impact of PERS in Springfield. Those were some of the issues that came on one city serving the other. The intergovernmental entity. An intergovernmental entity is a public body, municipal corporation created through an intergovernmental agreement. They're granted governmental powers through an IGA. You get to determine those powers. Primarily funded from city funds. They can't levy taxes as an entity in Oregon. Formation of an IGE board of directors is appointed by the cities. So the elected officials and city managers incorporated into some sort of a flow in how this would work in governance. And in our recommendation, the fire chief would then work for those board of directors. Somehow in that piece is the easiest way to get that streamlined process. The findings that we had, it does provide a single governance with an IGE board. Representatives from both councils, city managers can be involved in that pace. It retains the operational advantage that you have today. The city councils maintain oversight through representation on this IGE board for the overall policy level work of the fire department of ESF. And then the council, we recommended, would retain authority to approve the final ESF budget, their portion of that budget. Same 5 new administrative positions are recommended. The PERS option, when you come into a new entity, PERS assigns you a PERS rate. And until the actuarials evaluate the system, they give you the system-wide average for either independent or pooled. An independent, your independent, Springfield is pooled today. A pooled PERS rate simply insulates you from a few anomalies that might occur in impacting your rate. An independent means you are your rate. If you have more employees, you tend to be potentially better by being independent, but it's a decision that would have to be made. The independent rate, though, if ESF were go into an independent rate, right now, under today's system-wide average, you would save about $4 million per year until the actuarials re-rated the system. We anticipate that once all those liabilities come in, that you would probably be right about where you are today. So it wouldn't be a long-term savings. It might be 2 years until the actuarials come in. And that is a short-term issue. If you went to a pool rate, you would have a $630,000 increase in your PERS rate between the shared ESF. Once you're in the independent, though, at any time you can move from an independent to a pool rate. Once you're in the pool, you can't go back. So it would make sense to be independent if this was an option. With health insurance, you save about $1.3 million if you use Springfield's health plan. You increase the cost about $580,000 if you use Eugene's health plan. Both are good plans. They're valuable for different times in a person's life. They're both a decent option, but you would have that fluctuation if you wanted to move all of the employees into one health plan. The IGE could also develop its own health insurance as an entity. Again, that same concern of sustainability of health insurance for the city that loses the firefighters from their plan. It does streamline the experience for ESF. You do simplify the support services for the cities. Some of those services could be provided by ESF themselves, and some of them could be provided by one of the cities in making that particular system work. In our proposal, we recommend that facilities and apparatus stay with each city. The facilities themselves should stay as a regular core infrastructure for the city. The apparatus, the system is working reasonably well today. Not a need to make that a priority in a discussion on this particular model yet. It does offer some reasonable long-term planning depending on the term of an agreement, but you still have the potential of a termination of an agreement that makes real long-term planning more difficult. We would anticipate 12 to 18 months to finalize, maybe another 3 to 6 months after that for implementation on that. And pardon me, I'm having some allergy issues that there's a lot of allergens in Colorado too, not just Eugene. Key issues on this area, it provides a single governance and streamlined work. Both cities retain a voice, and ESF has a little more singular oversight. Requires a key discussion on governance and representation from each city. There needs to be that as a primary point. What should actually that governance model look like, and what should the scope of work that IGE does? The $4 million in savings for the first couple of years in PERS is a positive component. Simplification of support and ability for ESF to provide all or part of the administrative. You could have ESF do all of it themselves for a singular service fire district type model. Concern about the city's health plan and sustainability without the fire department is another one that would have to be explored. The fire district model, a form of local government, independent entity, board of directors are elected from the community, primarily funded through property tax. The findings that we had here is that you do get your single governance, you retain your operational advantages. There's no oversight from the cities. That would be done through a fire district. We estimate the initial tax rate of about $2.52 per thousand. This is a very simplified look at this. It's expenditures less revenue for fiscal year 23, taxable assessed value at fiscal year 23, the first year collection rate for taxes, which is estimated at 95.7 for Eugene and 95% for Springfield. It does not account for any future collections of delinquent taxes. It's just a snapshot of 1 year. It does not include a capital fund or an initial fund balance for a district to operate. And it does not address any of today's needs that are beyond today's operational capacities. So since we didn't operate or evaluate operations, it doesn't account for the potential need of another engine company or another station. That is not in this $2.52. To address some of the compression and issues, both cities should probably reduce an equal amount in their collection, which could be challenging, but it's an option that would best serve the community. Springfield themselves are experiencing compression today. They're losing $155,000 in their fire levy. That's creating an issue, and this could exacerbate it if it's not a reduction of equal or greater to what is done with a fire district. The streamlines fire district efforts, that streamlines the service model well. The district could ask for support services help from the cities in the transition. It doesn't have to be like a light switch to transition to that. Both cities would eventually, though, need to right-size what they can in their support services without the fire department in their city. It's a sustainable model with the right tax rate, but we all know how challenging tax rates are with growth and being able to keep up with service delivery. There's long-term planning for fire and EMS would be provided with this model because it would be an actual district. Formation takes approval of the county, vote of the people, and election of a board. Key issues here is that it does a number of positive things for the community, but the challenge for you to reduce the collection, the full amount needed, would, if you didn't do that, you would be impacting your potential for compression and costing more to the citizens. Also, no oversight by the cities, which was a critical issue for several elected officials that we talked with on this particular option. The next item was dissolving the functional merger. We found that this would be the best path to take if none of these other options are palatable for everybody. You would return to individual city fire departments. Eugene employees are designated as Eugene, and they would work in Eugene. Springfield employees would work in Springfield. The city managers then provide oversight for their fire department, and you could reestablish a mutual aid agreement that could be as robust as possible, but it's never quite going to be the same as it is today, where you're hiring, promoting, training everybody in the same way. Our findings in this area, you get a single governance and administration for each fire department. You do not retain your operational benefit. You do get full oversight for each city. The 11.25 positions were dropped and eliminated from the original time, and we recommend a minimum of 8 positions be reestablished, and this is a bare bones minimum number. Eugene would need a minimum of 5 at about 1.1 million. They would need a deputy chief, a finance manager, a battalion chief of training, a battalion chief fire marshal, and a program specialist. Springfield needs a minimum of 3 at about 800,000. They would need a fire chief, a deputy chief, and an executive assistant. ESF staff then would be separated, and very, very few of the firefighters in the field want this. Their cultures have merged, and fundamentally, they've indicated less than 3% may even think about it, and even the last time we talked, they probably said significantly less than 3% want to see that broken apart. Springfield Support Service has also allowed Eugene to manage a number of administrative functions. Springfield would have to enhance their support for their fire department in returning those things back. These models are sustainable at the level that you can afford that, but nowhere near in the depth that you provide today. Both cities can plan long-term because they're part of your city, and we would estimate it would take about 12 months to do this, to separate, but the IGA today provides for 2 fiscal years to separate. So you could agree to do it faster, or you could stay with the actual agreement in the time frame. The key issues for this one, it's more expensive. You lose your operational benefit from functional consolidation. The firefighters, again, have merged their culture, but each city can then manage and oversee their own fire department and streamline city services for the performance of their fire department system. What we found is our recommendation. We believe that the IGE meets the majority of the desired outcomes. It offers you a shared governance. You retain your operational capacity and reliability. You retain oversight by the cities. You benefit from ongoing annual cost reductions that you experienced 14 years ago. You get a one-time savings of $4 million per year for 2 years in PERS costs. And we have a proposed member fee system or shared cost system that helps to make sure that costs are fair as you move forward in the delivery, and a way to control those costs. Implementation-wise for us, we've created detailed action plans in 3 different phases to implement this. The development of an IGA requires you to walk through a number of issues that you would most likely get recommendations from your city manager and staff, about 20 action items to walk through to come to agreement there. A key one being, what exactly is the governance and what exactly is the IGE board going to be tasked with? The next one after you've done that is a review of the basic costs. Once you decide the path you take, then you can finalize some of the costing. We've got a lot of that in the full report, but until you make decisions on the primary IGA, you can't really lock those down. And then the last part is the actual implementation. If you get to that level, there's a dozen action items in there in the full report to make that work. Again, the critical issues that we talked about is, for this to work, you have to find consensus between the two cities on governance, the role of the IGE board, the baseline service delivery, and the member fee or shared cost system to make that work. For me, in closing, the capacity and reliability of ESF is significantly better together. The value is in the service more than necessarily just the cost savings, right? We believe the IGE is the best option to reach this. It's not the only, but we believe it's the best. Whichever option is chosen, though, it has to work for both cities. Both cities have to look out for their own issues and then see if they can find consensus with the other city. If you can't find value in this or any of the options, we recommend the dissolution of the functional consolidation. We don't think remaining in today's model is a good space to be in. And we have detailed action plans for the dissolution available in the full report as well. With that, are there any questions?
Okay, I thank you. I just want to say thank you first for such a clear report. It was clear to follow. There were clearly so many discussions and issues and permutations of all of this, and I just really appreciate what you've done for us in working our way through this and presenting it today. So I have Matt and Randy.
I want to go later.
Okay. Alan. Take it away, Matt.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate the deep dive, and I am curious why exploring the establishment of a fire district wasn't under consideration.
It was. It was the option.
Oh, it was the option while I was scratching my notes about the IGE.
It was right before dissolution. It was that one right in there, yes.
Where are the firefighters? Because you mentioned that less than 3% support scrapping and the merger and going back to the drawing board. Where do they poll on the IGE? Where do they poll on establishing a fire district? Where do they poll? Because if the 3%, if that's less than 3%, it's dead on arrival, as far as I'm concerned. But where does the staff land on the other options?
I don't know if I can accurately tell you which option they like, as much as it is they don't want to separate.
Okay.
Whichever option that you can find agreeable that keeps them together is the option that they're going to be most happy with. And the chief would probably have some better insight, because we didn't take a big poll of the organization on which option. They don't really know the options that are the good and the bad of all the options today.
Okay. Chief?
I mean, I definitely concur with Dan that staff want to stick together. To speak directly towards the overall staff view of a fire district, you really need to have that conversation with the IFF, because it's more political in nature. And they're going to be in the best position to kind of speak to what their members' interests are. That being said, being a part of this fire department since the beginning of the 3rd Battalion, I can tell you that knowing that IGE was a step along the way, or a potential logical next step in the process, has been pretty well known and understood across the organization. So
Okay.
that's probably the best that I can answer that
Okay.
question for you.
Well,
from the seat.
you piqued my interest with establishing an IGE. I appreciate the merits of the singular service model. I would just like to underscore my position as an elected official, that I would hope that we as a council in our entirety would act as a board of directors. And such a concept, I would hope, would legally be welcome, in that we already do so as an agency board, as an urban renewal agency board. And we already, as a council, have 3 employees under our purview: city manager, municipal court, judge, and police auditor. I wouldn't want to see us go down that road if it was to be set up similarly structured to the IGR, or even how subcommittees or ad hoc committees have been structured. The revenue team or the revenue committee comes to mind. I'm far more interested in every corner of our community being represented if we go toward an IGE structure.
And I can comment on that a bit, is that the system is set and proposed in a way that says the primary IGE governing body would be representatives from each council, not both full councils, and shared in that way. However, the full council would retain the authority to approve the final budgets and to make long-term decisions, but it would be cumbersome to bring both councils together all the time to address ESF issues. And that would perpetuate some of the problems that exist today if we didn't separate those out.
Interesting.
So think of it as more like you need to decide how much authority or do you want to delegate to this board. And let them go do that. Let some of the pre-planning get done. The city managers are going to be involved. A few representatives of elected officials will be involved. But then the budget would come back to you for your final, all full discussion with the full council.
Interesting. Okay. I may ask for a second round, Mayor. Thank you.
You're curious what Mike and Randy have to say since they sat on the committee. It's on. But since you guys didn't raise your hands, start off with the savings. It's only $2.5 million annually, which seems like a lot until you look at the budgets. And as a percentage of the budgets, it's actually not that big. $60 million in Eugene, $24 million in Springfield, $84 million. So $2.5 million is less than 3% savings that we got out of it. Relatively small savings. I had expected more when we made this decision back in the day, but and then with the consultant's recommendations of adding 5 new positions, that savings shrinks and wiping out about a third of that savings through the $900,000 add back. So this isn't a big financial savings. In fact, the savings actually favor Springfield, 1.3 million, Eugene 1.2 million, despite Eugene being almost three times larger. But the big impact for me has been on service, the fire and life safety service. And as the presentation said, the value's in the service more than the savings. So I get that. That's kind of the point here. It's not about the financial savings. I understand the challenges of the two employers and the persistent challenges. I'm trying to understand better the challenges, the admin and benefits and policy changes. It said that the challenges occur almost daily, create inefficiencies in the administrative and supportive areas. Both cities have made progress, but persistent issues remain, some large, some small, but they can't be resolved. I guess, why do they persist and how big of a deal is this? It seems like, I don't know if it's a big deal.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question because on the surface, it seems simple. But fundamentally, we have 2 different cities with different policies and procedures. So the fire department ends up with 2 different complete budget systems that are unique from each other that have to be separated and delivered separately in different styles. Purchasing policies are different, so the staff have to do it differently for each one. Some of the purchases are shared purchases, which requires the city then to work together with the other city to process who has different purchasing policies. Payroll is done differently. You smooth your payroll and Springfield does not. So the pay is delivered in a different way and tracked in a different manner, which creates the duplication that can't be, you have not been able to merge all your policies between the 2 cities. Human resource issues, risk tolerance, et cetera, it creates some of those same differences of opinion. One, you use your city attorney, another one contracts out risk management to address issues. Your labor negotiations are done differently. The powers of your city manager here are greater than they are in Springfield. The Springfield Council engages more directly in contracts and all other major purchases. So the process requires ratification of a labor negotiation to be done very differently between the two. Disciplinary actions, if you have a Springfield employee being disciplined by a Eugene supervisor, you're involving both HRs, both risk managers. A lot more people are involved than would normally be involved in a typical problem that creates there. You have health insurance benefits that are different for people that sit in the same fire station. So they're just different enough, and if they could choose, they wouldn't complain or have a problem with it, but they don't get to choose because they're assigned one city or the other at higher. So it may or may not be the best plan for their life at that moment in time. And then the hiring processes, a lot of that's been done through Eugene today, and again, the employees are assigned which city they're going to end up working at through that process. Those are a few of the highlights.
Just a few.
There's a lot more in the report that go into, but those are some of the bigger picture ones that it seems very simple on the surface, and I kept thinking I would find the magic bullet, and the more I talked to all of the staff, and put yourself in the shoes of, say, an HR person in Eugene who's dealing with all the other departments one way, and then has to remember that when Eugene Springfield Fire comes up, they now have to reach out across to the other city and coordinate their process. And newer employees end up creating some new gaps. So maybe some people are hired and then Springfield isn't notified even of a new hire until they have to onboard them on Monday. Not intentional, nobody's making anything, everybody's working really hard to make it work. It's just, unless you were to come together and merge all of your city policies, it just can't seem to quite get there.
Two cities, the only thing we have in common is we're cities,
Yeah.
it seems like. The intergovernmental entity, I guess my model for that is the MWMC, and how that, where the three jurisdictions have reps with equal say votes, three entities approve the budget, Lynn County, just Springfield and Eugene, and they have one user fee for everybody. So how does this proposal differ from that one in particular?
There's a lot of similarities to it. I think you could argue it's a much more high profile and more engaged system by dealing with the fire and EMS part. The member fee model it's also not a direct billing, it's coming from your actual funds as opposed to controlling their own revenue stream. They control a portion of it, but not nearly what your portion would be. The fee structure that we've proposed you consider and look at is really based on the number of engine and truck companies that you have in service, divide that up, and then that kind of sets the baseline for delivering the service model. Where the cities cross over and where there's 4 stations that cross over into the other city, you look at 3 years of call volume and you split the cost of that particular unit, whatever that is, 80, 20, 17, whatever percent that would be, which allows for you to change and evolve. So it's more complicated in a way because it's not setting its own rates.
I would just also jump in. I think the key difference from my perspective is MWMC, we still have Springfield employees that take care of the administration, the legal issues, the long-range planning, but they're Springfield employees, and we have Eugene employees that are running the plant, doing operations on the street. There's Eugene employees. In this situation that they're recommending, the IGE would actually hire the employees, so they would be employees of the IGE and no longer City of Springfield or City of Eugene employees. So now it's a whole different next level, I think.
Yeah, the part that I didn't get was, so if that's so, and I understood that, then but we still all retain the oversight of the budget and approval process for that. But the entity actually has one set of policies and does all the hiring, has one budget, but we all have oversight and approve the budget.
That was perfectly put.
Okay,
We'll need another round.
okay, I'll give you a second round. All right, I think I've got Mike and then Randy, is that right? Go for it, Mike. Oh,
Thank you, Mayor. Dan and Chief, thank you very much, and to Triton, we appreciate all the hard work. I think that I agree with your recommendation, and from all of the work that we've done, I think the IGE is the best model. I'm one of the electeds who said I don't favor a district, and the reason is just so you understand. From my point of view, the district then has its own governing structure, so they would have an elected board of directors, and the city of Eugene would no longer have any say about what happens with the fire department. I suspect that the people of our community might expect the city council to have something to say about the fire department, and without that ability, I think that would be a mismatch between the citizens' expectation and what the council could actually do or accomplish. It would also be a pretty big chunk of taxing authority that we would have to give up to the district, and revenue we would have to see forfeited. And I think the IGE is the best model. My only concern from this point is what our timeline is on the action plan, and specifically, I think it will be less difficult for our council to come to strong agreement on a way forward than it will between Eugene and Springfield with regard to that governance structure. And I, for one, will look forward to AP Triton's recommendations, knowing that you've worked with so many other cities, that you've seen other different ways other cities have resolved those governance questions, where there are even multiple cities involved. I think we're going to need a full slate of recommendations or choices about how we might, whether one city has veto power, whether or not, we have an equal number of votes or not. So I will look forward to those recommendations that, and I said I will hope it's more than one recommendation per each of those kind of questions.
The way we built the action items is more of a, you need to determine X. Here's a suggestion. But I think the challenge is going to be that there's so many different ways to look at it, and it's the back and forth that's going to take the time. We've identified some of the ways that we think would work really well, but the difference is the model I'm most experienced with, we had 15 cities, and in some ways it was easier to find the consensus than with 2. So with the 2 cities, I honestly think you're gonna have some strong opinions about how the governance should look, and a different opinion, and then you're gonna be back and forth. Even in our model, we would start with a couple of components, and we would tend to get consensus, and then as we moved along, 5 months later, a city would realize, I really don't like that. Let's go back to that topic, and it's gonna end up being. The work is going to be initially in building out the actual agreement back and forth. And there's components and ways to look at it. There's options that relate to some other ways cities are doing it. But we've provided you with a kind of a starting point. This is the decision you got to make. Consider this.
Well, as I said, I read the action plan, the summary, and all of the stuff, and I will look forward to further recommendations as we get into a discussion of however the character of that looks with the city of Springfield to try and work through those individual steps.
Great.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Randy and then Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief Caven. Thank you, Chief Peterson, for all the work you have done on this. And I want to thank all of our firefighters who have made this system work really well for a lot of years now. I also want to thank both cities for being willing to take a risk and try a new model that has proven to be extremely effective. I want to thank the public for their support as well. And I think there's a lot of people that have really put their heart and soul into getting us to where we are today. And it is a better system for our communities, and it is a better system and safer system for our firefighters. Going back to the cost versus service, going back to 2007, when then Springfield Fire Chief Dennis Murphy and I started having discussions about this, it was all about the operations. If you'll remember back then, or maybe you weren't even aware, we used to have what we called hard boundaries, meaning if a call happened in the other jurisdiction, even if the opposite jurisdiction were closer, they didn't respond. It was all handled by the closest unit in the city you were in at the time. And I don't believe that that was the best way to serve our communities. And taking our resources and putting them together improved surge capacity. A lot of people were saying at the time, well, you've got mutual aid. Mutual aid is not the same thing as what we have here. It functions like one organization. Hired the same, trained the same, equipped the same. I equate mutual aid to playing a football game, and halfway through the first quarter, a second team comes in, very talented, but they've got different set of plays, different equipment, and you start running into each other. And that's kind of what happens if incident is not controlled very closely. So it was really never about the cost until 2008 hit, and that's when the Great Recession landed in our laps. And then all of a sudden, cost became king. And the amount we were saving at the time, it doesn't sound large compared to the percentage of overall budget, but it still wasn't nothing. I mean, it was a lot of money. And so that became what everybody focused on. But the genesis of this was all about the service. And I think it has proven quite well on that. Getting to the specifics, because I'm going to run out of time quickly here, I'm not afraid of a district, but I do believe where we're headed right now, hopefully, towards an IGE is our best landing point here. And, we can always assess in the future, but right now we need to jump off. And this back and forth invoicing between the cities, it doesn't work. It's hard for our firefighters also to have a set identity. And I'm running out of time and ask for a second round. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Yeah, again, thank you for the report. I think that since I've been on counseling, before I came on council, this has been a very divisive issue. Even talking about how do we merge, the services, the basic fire services and emergency services we're delivering in both cities that, really doesn't change. It is the same basic service. The problems that we have are structural in terms of payroll, governance, purchasing, insurance, PERS, all of that. But I think the major overall arching challenge that we have is cultural. And when I've talked to firefighters and I've talked to others about this situation, it always comes back to that the Eugene culture and the Springfield culture of each departments are not the same. And ne'er the two shall meet. So my question is, how do we reconcile, in the best way that we can, that cultural schism between Eugene and Springfield and the SAF? Is there an idea to figure this out?
So completely understand the concern or the question, and over the last 14 years since we started the functional consolidation, but most importantly, next month marks a decade that we've been working together without any borders or boundaries to where firefighters work. And there was a lot of trepidation when we started working together. There was a lot of trepidation about how we did our business. And then we started working together. We started hiring together. We started academies together. I don't have the specific number in front of me today, but we're probably approaching 50% of our staff were hired as Eugene Springfield firefighters. Our culture is, to Dan's point on the 3%, is 97% ESF. This is who we are. This is who we've become. There is some components on the core kind of root of where people work, where they don't feel like they belong in any one specific space. But as far as the culture wars in the firehouse, in the way we do our business, it's pretty few and far between that people are like, well, it's not how we do it, or we shouldn't do it that way because it's the Eugene way or the Springfield way. Most all of that is gone. We have it took time. It took time for, in particular, there's a lot more opportunities and special assignments and administrative assignments in Eugene because it was a much larger fire department, and Springfield took, I would say, some more cuts than Eugene in some of those functions to start this. So it took time before Springfield folks became the leaders of teams and in charge of specific areas. Just last week before last, we had the water rescue team talking about a pretty harrowing rescue at the Eugene All-City meeting, and the battalion chief that oversees that team and the captain, who is the shift team leader, both Springfield employees presenting to the city of Eugene all staff meeting. So to that point, I don't think that culture between Eugene and Springfield is an issue. What people are most afraid of is what happens if this falls apart. Who goes back? I mean, that's what I hear most out of when we've had meetings along this process, and there's been questions of what does that mean? Does that mean we're going to break up? What happens to me? What happens to my crew? We've all adopted the two communities as our community. We talk about it as the community, not the city versus that city in the way that we're serving it. So to that, I would really highlight that we're beyond that at this point, with a few outliers.
So, Chief Caven, if we're beyond that cultural divide, I'm really kind of challenged in terms of how we can resolve some of the structural issues that is presented, not just in the report, but, in the differences between the cities, particularly when we're talking about basic functions like, again, payroll, insurance, governance. That should be something that we should be able to resolve in a much more collaborative way if we don't have the same cultural challenges that we've had in the past.
Well, I would clarify, on the cultural stuff, the people providing the service, those cultural issues are beyond. There are cultural issues in the way that the cities do their business that create the challenges that you're talking about. A lot of things that are mentioned in the report talk about, patchwork in accessing systems or paperwork. The most recent kind of update that happened after this report was we've all heard about Paid Leave Oregon and all the different codes. Payroll in both cities created different codes for all the employees. It kind of changed all of that. And the infrastructure that talks from the fire department's roster into the payroll systems that pay them, they don't recognize those. And so now staff in timekeeping have to copy onto spreadsheets and manually enter all of these things because they're different. And so the infrastructure that this was kind of put together on is crumbling, and the steps that AP Triton recommends in the IGE, they take a bite at bringing the cities together culturally on what is the expanse to which they can agree to combine those functions as similarly as possible.
So doesn't that move us more toward IGE special district than where we are right now?
To the IGE, for sure. I would call it out when you look at the IGE as proposed by Triton. It has the fire department, if you fully execute and say, you know what, we're going to put all of the services onto the IGE, which you would have the authority to sign an IGA to do that with Springfield, would look a lot like a special district without the ability to tax. So the cities still retain the control over service level and kind of what services you're looking for in the community, and ultimately approval within your budget, whereas if it went to a special district, it would be that board's authority 100%.
So basically, we would still, with the IGE, we would still be in the Springfield versus Eugene food fight over revenue.
You should have those agreed to, kind of how you build the fees, and the report talks about how service fees or member fees are put together in there. But at the end of the day, and I'll let Dan pick up on this point, we're in challenging times financially across the state of Oregon. It's not Eugene, it's not Springfield, it's everybody. That hard decisions on new revenues and hard decisions on what if you don't get new revenue are a reality. And it would still boil down to, can we provide the service within, the revenues available? And if not, then that would be directed to the IGE board and whoever is responsible for that structure to make those necessary adjustments to the service level and the overall budget.
Okay, thank you. I have 3 counselors who want a second round. Are there counselors who haven't asked a question who would like a moment? Okay. Counselor Ye. Jennifer.
And here,
I gotta push my button. Sorry. Oh my gosh, too many things to remember. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate how you took the time to go through all of the options before making your recommendation, even though some of them you clearly weren't in favor of. I thank you for taking the time so that we all have all that information and the public as well. I am incredibly proud of the folks who came before me who took on this challenge to, like Randy said, to say, we're going to put people first. We're going to figure out how to work together so that people in our community are more safe. And we're finally here trying to wrap up those last little loose ends. But I just want to be thankful for the folks who took that risk, right, all those years ago, so that we could be here. I serve on the MWMC, so I'm on an IGE that is different, but I assume will look somewhat similar to what we're doing, and it works incredibly well. We have 3 governmental agencies that are working together, and there isn't conflict. If things work very well and people understand it's the greater good and talk out issues, and so I'm very hopeful and positive about how this could work, even with the complexities. On MWMC, there's also civilian members of the board, which I find very, very valuable. I don't know if that would be in this scenario recommendation or not, but I find that they bring something really special and helpful to the conversation, and if I would think that would be the same case with Eugene Springfield Fire too. So I just wanted to put that recommendation up there, and thanks so much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Before I queue up the second round, I wanted to say something really after Greg's line of questioning, which is that this is so promising, the idea that we would take where we are and we would step into it more fully and more completely. And I think across many issues, we're talking about fire services, but across many issues, we actually increasingly need to see ourselves as a larger metropolitan district. And there are huge advantages to working closely together with our sister city in many, many ways. And if this is the leading edge of that kind of conversation and cooperation, in my mind, that's valuable not only for our fire services, it's valuable for our 2 communities in terms of how we address these other issues that actually don't recognize boundaries either. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank the ESF, the Eugene Springfield Fire, for sort of leading the way in that conversation and recognizing that this difference of scale and scope and structure that we have between these 2 cities, this is a good thing for us to try to work out in a collaborative way. So I thank you for that. And with that, I have Matt, Alan, and Randy.
I'm fine, thanks.
You're fine? Okay. Alan?
I would agree that it would be a shame if we went backwards. Chief Caven, I'm trying to understand the better service part of this. How much better is the service, and why is it better?
That was
Break it.
a concerning sound. The service is considerably better, mainly due to the number of resources that we have available and our ability to respond to multiple emergencies concurrently. This weekend, we saw that play out a number of different times, from multiple resources being committed to a house fire in Springfield to kind of organizing crews and freeing things up to respond to a pretty significant resource intense water rescue. We saw in the morning that the fire that was threatening Bring the next day. We saw a medical call while that fire was going on turn into a pretty significant high-risk gas leak. It's our ability to handle major emergencies concurrently a lot. Yesterday, we had a second alarm house fire, a number of medical calls, a grass fire in West Eugene. We had the resources to cover it, where in years past, either one of our cities would run out of resources very quickly and have to call in and rely on off-duty firefighters to come back in and respond to calls. I can't think of the last time that we had to call in off-duty firefighters to cover our calls, despite being 40% busier in call volume in the city of Eugene in particular in the last 10 years. And so really, it's about that. It's about surge capacity. It's knowing that we're covering calls and we have a sufficient number of firefighters on scene, not only to handle the problem, but to handle anything that could go wrong. And then lastly it's the economy of scale in our ability to provide services, training, buying equipment, all of those things that help us leverage ourselves as a larger agency in that space. And so hands down, significantly better in the depth of resources to take care of our crews and our communities.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I understand it's about the better service, but we can't really ignore how the savings shake out. And right now, the savings aren't proportional to the two cities. I want to make sure that there's not a big subsidy one way or the other. How do we assure that? Is that inherent to the structure of an IGA?
Not necessarily, but it is the model that we built your member fee on. And so the background of that was what we put together in Salt Lake with Unified Fire Authority, was to find a way to have 15 different cities share resources and feel like their money was staying in their city and they were benefiting from a larger regional model, right? So we built that model and we implemented it here in charts in the full report that shows that for each station that has an engine or truck that's fully in Eugene, you pay the 100% of that cost. But every station that shares a boundary, that gets proportioned out. And then you layer on top of that all of the other costs, and basically you take the total cost of the service divided by the number of engine and trucks, and then that's how you balance that. And then you break out costs like your airport model, right? Your airport response is a Eugene-specific expense that's broken out of the shared cost, and it's an isolated cost for Eugene. If you wanted to add 4-person crews on your truck, you can isolate that cost just for Eugene. If Springfield wanted to add another engine, they can add another engine, and that balances that out. And it gives you a chance to look at this option and go by first due areas. And then you think of regional resources become battalion chiefs and administration, all those other components. We were successful in getting all of those cities to be supportive of that model and agree that their money was staying with their money and they were benefiting from that model. That's what's in there as a proposal, very specific and detailed in the report. It may not be the best one, but it's one that I believe addresses what you're talking about.
Right, so the member fee structure would allow services, allow new services without impacting the other cities. So I understand, can you explain how, so if Eugene were to build a new fire station, staff it up and equip it with new engines, how that would work for Springfield and
So,
Eugene?
sure. In fact, either way, if you add another company, right, you would now divide by one additional company the total cost of service, So every company cost would drop just a smidge, and then the new company would be embedded inside of Eugene, so that full cost would be layered in on the Eugene side of the equation. If Springfield did the same thing, it would be layered in on the Springfield side of the equation. If you wanted to do the reverse, you could also lower staffing or close a station or shut down an engine, and that savings would come to Eugene or Springfield unless you did it on the boundary.
Okay.
So that movement back and forth,
So it isolates.
it isolates it, but what it allows though is that becomes the administrative process. But inside the fire department, it is one system with one
Right.
set of policies, one operational deployment, and you don't have to think about exactly, it was cumbersome for me to find out exactly who paid for what position. You know, in one case, Springfield is paying for a battalion chief, but he's actually acting as a training chief, but he's being billed back in that, and tracking that down kept, all of those details were very difficult to track down. This would eliminate that type of work. Everybody would then be working under a more global picture of the cost.
I have two other questions. I think the IGE model is probably the way to go if we can come to agreement on all of that, but there's a couple of things sticking about that. One of the things about it is that makes sure I understand it. And what would be the unintended consequences of shifting to an IGA model? For example, the council would actually cede some of its authority to the IGA board and be one step removed from the decision-making, as we are with MWMC. That's not a problem, but it's what happens when you create this kind of model. What are some of the unintended consequences?
I think that's feasible. You would have less direct control. Some of the shared costs that you might want to manage would require you to collaborate with Springfield to reduce a cost if it's a full-on shared cost, right? There's some really isolated components you can manage, but otherwise it becomes that process. I think that you would be engaging this potential boundaries that you want to set towards future budget issues that might limit an increase or manage some cost that you set as a council, and then you send that message with your IGE representation to deal with that, and then your city managers really would be carrying out the interests directly that you've delegated to them. And again, the two cities have a slightly different approach, but it could be managed better potentially by having a smaller group that manages it from both cities instead of having completely separate conversations between the two cities when it came to service delivery of Eugene Springfield Fire.
Yeah, operationally, that makes sense.
Even administratively and just global budgetarily. You though, we've proposed that you retain the power to approve the final budget.
Right.
You can delegate that completely to the IGE, which was done in Salt Lake. The full budget authority was given to that entity.
Oh, that seems like an unelected board.
It would have been very difficult to do that differently with 15 cities.
Yeah. And, well, who hires the chief? And does the chief then hire all the employees like the cities hire a city manager and then the city manager hires all the employees?
Those become the details that we recommend you work through in those action items. We believe that that board and the city managers then supervise and hire the fire chief. But that's a starting point, as Councilman Clark identified. You've got to decide that's what you want to happen.
Yeah, and that kind of brings up the governance issue, and you brought up in the report governance and the vote weighting. For each city in the new entity, Eugene's a lot larger than Springfield, almost 3 times as big. Is that a pretty big stumbling block? Maybe that's a city manager question.
I was actually going to say that, one, I want to also give my gratitude to you for the work and for digging in. It's been not easy to unravel what you've unraveled, to put it all together into a proposal and to hit all 5. So I'm very grateful for that and for the patience of ESF to get us here. I feel like my whole job now is to work through the unintended consequences, and I've been asking a lot of those questions and trying to understand it, because before we move forward, eventually I'll have to make a recommendation that will have taken all of that into account, so that you understand what the implications are for the whole city of Eugene and for Eugene Springfield Fire, and what that could be in the long term. So I have a lot of questions, but I also feel, I can't remember if it was you that said hope or encouragement. It feels really good to have gotten to this place, but yeah, I still have a lot of questions.
Yeah, there's a lot to be figured out.
Yeah, there is.
Okay, Randy?
Thank you, Mayor. Just real quickly, I want to go back to my list of thank yous and gratitude. I also want to thank Chief Murphy from Springfield, who actually retired early to make this happen. It was something we both believed in greatly, again, going back to people. Also, when we get to cost savings, there's actual hard dollar expenditures, and there's also cost avoidance. For example, when we first privatized part of our ambulance system, it was to shed call volume and thereby avoid having to add more expensive firefighter paramedic units that the system and the revenue would not support. And to a certain extent, some of the disparity in costs, I think, can kind of go back to call volume and who's responding to what. Chief Caven, is it still the case where Springfield is penetrating fairly deeply into Eugene area for a first-in response from their Station 5?
Yes, we actually just this fall have been running a trial of the ambulance from Station 5 is actually deploying from Station 6 to balance the workload within the system. But the reality is Springfield has more ambulances available per capita than Eugene does, and so both medics 4 and 5 spend a considerable amount of time in Eugene.
Is that also true with suppression companies and the first tier of a medical response?
It's a little more balanced. We actually did an analysis from the beginning. What we've seen in the last decade is that call volume in Eugene's gone up 40%, and call volume in Springfield's gone up about 21%. And so you might see those numbers and imagine there's a tremendous amount of supplementation going on. What we found is there's less first response into Eugene from Springfield today than there was 10 years ago. So it's not creating a balancing act there. Engines 4 and 5 spend about 15% of their time servicing Harlow Road and the MLK areas of Eugene. And then Engine 13 from the university services the Glenwood area. So there's a net balance of about 15% that Springfield units are serving Eugene.
Okay, thank you. Also, going back to kind of the distribution of resources and surge capacity, shortly after we integrated crews, we had 3 Sentinel events over a 2-year period of time. The first was the Swanson Mill Fire in Springfield, which was a horrific, very large event, a lot of exposures, a lot of risk, including chemicals. And that was a place where, on that day, Eugene help supplement Springfield. The following year, we had 2 Sentinel events, and it's interesting, it worked out to be a 1/3, 2/3 split, just like our 2 cities. We had Civic Stadium fire on a red flag warning day where the flame links the wind was taking these probably 60-foot flame links, and they were also blowing them flat and creating huge exposures on College Hill. That was followed up by the bowling alley, Southtown Lanes fire with a bowstring truss roof that collapsed, and huge exposures there too, where we really relied on the Springfield resources coming over to augment and also backfill and spread out our resources further. And I compare that to another incident on Labor Day of 1994. I was a battalion chief at the time, and we had a high-rise fire in the Eugene Hotel that basically stripped everything we had in Eugene. And it was a hot, busy day. And we had a fire that got started on Willow Gillespie Butte, and being able to rely on mutual aid helped. But we had really no no more than like one available Eugene resource for the whole city. So I feel a lot better now knowing that everybody's trained to the same standard and we have fully integrated crews. And again, it still makes me proud to see how our people perform. How did that happen? Okay, thank you, Mayor.
You had a lot to say. Thank you. All right, are there any other comments or questions? Well, I think with that, again, thank you very, very much for the report, for all of the work, for the thoughtful responses to our questions. Thank you, Chief, for giving us an update on what you've been facing the last few days with this hot weather and the fire. So appreciation to all of your teams for all that they're doing to keep us all safe and keep things under control. And so thank you all very much. Yes.
I just wanted to add gratitude for the team that worked on this, Councilors Groves, Clark, Rodley and Moe, the city managers, most importantly, Assistant City Manager Hammett and Assistant City Manager Ladati. They've done a tremendous amount of heavy lifting in this process. And then staff from both cities who have taken already busy schedules to get Triton the information they need and continuously review these reports so we get this right for our communities. So gratitude to them and everybody serving our communities.
Thank you so much. And with that, we are adjourned.